Hello plant people, it's Nora the Leca Queen here. Today we are going to be watering moss poles that live in Leca. So I know lots of you have been asking me questions about how do I water my moss poles that are living in Leca. So I've got my little Syngonium fantasy here that's living in Leca. We are going to be watering this one and other plants just like it. I'm also going to show you how I water my Snow Queen / Enjoy moss wall. So keep an eye out for that one. So in order for me to water my moss poles that live in Leca, I need a few things. So one thing that is very, very important is this. This is my trusty Hills sprayer. I use this sprayer all the time, and within this sprayer is my nutrient solution. So this is the nutrient solution that I have sitting in my reservoir, and it's made up of Growth Technology Foliage Focus and Root Zone. So I've got that in there. I also need, this is my nutrient solution again. So I've got nutrient solution in, this is like a jug, and importantly, I've also got nutrient solution in little bottles. So this is a teeny weeny, what is that, 250 ml bottle, old juice bottle. I've got, some water bottles, and I'm going to use all those things to help me water my moss poles. Now, why is the pressure sprayer important? So this is the pressure sprayer I use. It's a Hills pressure sprayer. I really love it. It gives some good pressure on there and really does a good spray. And it also has this, what is it? Like the nozzle that's on there. It's got a nice fan spray. So that really works out nicely. So I'm not spraying everything everywhere. And I use this to get the moss outside the moss pole moist, because as you'll know, dry moss is hydrophobic, and that means it finds it very difficult to get wet. It's very hard for it to absorb water. So if you get a very dry moss pole and you put water on it, all that water is just going to go on the floor, and that's no good because no one likes cleaning up. So what I like to do is just spray the outside of the pole with my pressure sprayer just to get that moss moist, and then I put more nutrient solution to get it as wet as I can. So I'm going to bring you down here and I'm going to show you how I do that for my Syngonium. So before I start spraying, I should tell you that I actually emptied the reservoir of my plant, and the reason I do that is because once I start moistening this moss pole, the nutrient solution from the moss is going to go into the reservoir, and I don't want it to flood. But also, I'm just getting rid of all the old nutrient solution. I give my reservoir a rinse, and we're starting from scratch. So let's get spraying. So I'm just going to turn this around, and I'm going to start from the back. So as you can see, that is a good spray. I'll just moisten that as much as I can. I really like this sprayer because that is a pretty effective spray and it's getting everywhere. So I try and get the whole surface of the moss pole wet, including the top. So that is now nice and moist. So what I'll now do is grab one of my bottles, and this bottle has got nutrient solution within it, and I am going to tip this over right at the top and have that solution go in the moss pole. So I've got my bottle here and I'll just flip that over, and that is now going into my moss pole. So whilst this Syngonium is getting watered, I'll put that aside and I'll bring another plant. So this right here is my Snow Queen wall. I'm going to moisten this one as well. What's important to note with this pole is that it's very, very thin. So for this particular plant, just using my pressure sprayer actually works well. I don't need to do anything else because it's very thin and my pressure sprayer has a lot of pressure and it does penetrate through, and that's if I'm spraying from the front, from the back, and I spray from the front. So this is the back of my plant and I'm going to use my pressure sprayer. I've got the pressure on and I will start to spray. You can see how easily that nutrient solution goes into that moss, and that's because this moss pole was not completely dry, so the moss is able to nicely absorb the nutrient solution. So I'll just keep spraying. So I think that's enough at the back. I will now turn it around to the front. So that's the front of the plant and I will spray that as well. So I'll just pull those down a little bit. So, and that one is okay. So this moss wall is actually quite long, but I'm not going to moisten the top bit of it because there's no need to. The plant is only up to here. So I stop there. And the good thing about using the nutrient solution that I have in my reservoir is that the excess from the moss just goes and sits in the reservoir and feeds the plant. So that's how that works for my moss wall, and my plant is really, really happy. So this one here is a little Satin Pothos and it is dry, dry, dry. That moss pole is so dry, it's embarrassing. It's not even funny. So I'm going to use my pressure sprayer and just get my nutrient solution onto that. This moss pole is very dry, and because it's very dry, the moss is hydrophobic. It doesn't easily absorb water. So take a look at the insert video to see how that water is not latching onto the moss pole and it's just freely falling off until I spray enough on it that it gets wet and starts to absorb. So now that this moss pole, I've sprayed the outside and it's now not as dry as it was, and it will readily take that nutrient solution that I'm going to pour into it. If you're finding value from this video, please like and subscribe because it really helps my channel. Thank you. Now back to the moss pole. I've got my jug with my nutrient solution, and all I'm going to do now is just pour that nutrient solution from the top. And as I do that slowly, that all goes straight through and I'm not getting nutrient solution falling out the side because the outside of the moss pole is wet. And I'll keep doing this slowly until I've got the whole moss pole moist and I get nutrient solution coming out of the bottom. And at that point, I know that my moss pole is moist. So because this is a tiny moss pole, you can see it's now looking nice and moist, and I can feel that it's actually wet all through from the top to the bottom, and I have nutrient solution collecting in there. This little moss pole is now nice and moist. If you haven't seen any of my videos where I show you how to make a moss pole, either a simple round one or a plastic sheet back one, just click on the link above and that'll take you straight to it. We are now back to my Syngonium moss pole, and that little bottle's empty now, and that moss, when I squeeze it, sounds and feels very wet. So I wouldn't need to put any more, and what I'm getting now is that there's actually liquid in my reservoir. So that nutrient solution has come through the moss and gone right to the bottom of my reservoir. So I know that this moss pole is as moist as it can get. So I will now put this one back there and let it sit. And after about 20-30 minutes, I will go and reevaluate the reservoir. And if I feel that the reservoir is too high, there is too much liquid in there, all I need to do is tip that liquid out, and so that my plant actually does not get root rot. So I'll put this one away and bring another plant. Okay, I got another plant here. This one is my golden ivy. This is the golden ivy that I put up on a moss pole, I don't know, maybe about a month or so ago. And it's doing okay so far, but I need to water the moss pole. So this moss pole is actually quite dry. And when I squeeze it, you can hear that typical crinkly noise. The moss is dry. So what I'll be doing with this one is I'm going to spray that with my pressure sprayer, and I will only be spraying the bottom of the pole. I don't need to do the whole pole. It's pretty long, so there's no point in actually watering all this when it's all going to dry off anyway. So I'm only going to do the bits that the plant needs. There we go. And I'll turn it around. So I go just a bit of a way above the plant. So that's good. So for this plant, I've moistened the outside of the moss, but the inside of that moss pole is actually not as wet as I would like. I do have nutrient solution in the reservoir there, and that's just the excess that was falling off when I was spraying this one. So I let that plant stand for a few minutes just to make sure that that moss is really moist. I'll take the plant out of the reservoir, put it on a surface, and I will get this nutrient solution, tip the plant over like this, and put that nutrient solution through like that. So I'm pouring that into the moss. So there is no waste. So a lot of that has come through onto my dish, and I'll just put it back there. And I'll do the same thing again from the front. And I'll repeat. So this moss pole is now well watered, but only from that portion. I haven't watered the whole moss pole. I've just watered the bit where the plant is in contact. I will put this back in its reservoir. Note that this reservoir is dry, so I'm just having it drain in the reservoir. I've got another plant. This is my philodendron, Brasil, also living on a moss pole in Leca. And this one's living on a moss pole with a plastic sheet back. So I'm not going to be able to actually spray the back of this moss pole, so I can only spray the top and the front. So this moss pole was actually not bone dry, so it's really doing a good job of absorbing that nutrient solution. So it's very easy to actually keep your moss poles moist if you do it consistently and you're not having to start from a moss pole that's really, really dry. So what this means is I'm actually able to pour solution on the top and it'll just seep through. So I've got a bottle with my nutrient solution there, and all I do is just put that through and that'll go in rather nicely. So as you can see, I don't have any nutrient solution spilling everywhere. And that's just all going straight through to moisten up my moss, and my aerial roots are loving it. So I think that's enough. So I'm going to let that stand, let that drain, and let all the nutrient solution go down to the reservoir. And then when it's in the reservoir, I'll probably put it through again, have that drain again, and then we'll see where we go from there. So I'll put this one away. This is my Syngonium Mojito. Mojito Syngonium, living on a little moss pole in Leca. So this one, moss pole is a bit dry, so I'm going to moisten that with my pressure sprayer and get that nutrient solution through the top. So as you can see, this moss pole is dry and is a bit hydrophobic. So I get nutrient solution falling on the side. So that's getting wet and is now absorbing. The other good thing about using a pressure sprayer is that you actually get some of that nutrient solution onto the leaves as well. And remember, foliage focus acts as a foliar spray as well. So you're not just providing nutrients to your roots, you're also providing nutrients to your leaves. So yeah, it's a win-win. So this one is done, and I'll spray the top as well. I'll let that stand for a few minutes, and then I get my bottle. And my bottle has got my nutrient solution, and I'm just gonna pour that from the top. So that's going in really, really well. And I think that's actually going to do for this pole. It's actually quite a thin moss pole, so I think all that nutrient solution is going to go straight through. So what I'll do now is just put this one to stand and drain, and I will bring the next plant. This here is my marble queen. This is my Epipremnum marble queen. She's living in Leca on a moss pole as well. And this is a reservoir, which is now empty. So same thing, you know the drill by now. I'm just gonna moisten this moss pole with my sprayer, and then I'll put a bottle at the top. So I grab my sprayer and I start at the back. This pole is actually moist already, so that's going in really, really well. Now, with this particular moss pole, the plant has actually almost gotten to the top of the pole, so I will be putting that nutrient solution through the top as well. So I'm gonna put my plant on a stool, and I'll get my little nutrient solution bottle, and I'll just flip that upside down. So I'll put that in there, and I'll let that rest. So sometimes it actually can be a little bit tricky to get the bottle suspended on top of the moss pole because it starts to topple over. So I always just lean it against something if I've got one of those poles, and the nutrient solution can go in nicely while my pole is nice and steady. So that is happening there, and that's going to drain through that rather nicely. So that bottle's now done, and this plant, whoops. So that bottle's now done, and this plant, moss pole, is well and truly watered, and I'm getting solution coming down into the reservoir. So I'm just going to let this stand and let that moss pole drain. I've got my neon pothos that's living on a moss pole. That's doing really, really well. This plant has actually reached the top of its pole, and I really should be giving it a pole extension. But, you know, she's doing so well, but I want to show you what her aerial roots are doing. This plant is just crazy. That is an aerial root there. There's another. And if you look at the bottom here, you've got some crazy aerial roots that are going down into the leca. So this plant is really taking full advantage of this moss pole and really loves it, but is dry. This moss pole is dry. I need to moisten that up. So I'll grab my pressure sprayer and away I go. So spraying this plant this way does not mean that it is now moist. This moss pole is still very dry on the inside. All I've done is make the outside moist. So what I'm going to do now is put it on my little stool and tip that bottle over on it so that the middle of the moss pole starts to absorb nutrient solution. So I've got my moss pole here leaning against that, and I will simply tip that bottle over and let that solution run through the moss pole. So this is going rather quickly, and I know this is a bigger moss pole, so I know I'll definitely need a second or a third bottle for this plant. So while that's happening, let's take a look at how the other plants have been going. So this is my Syngonium albo, and that moss pole feels nice and moist, and there's lots of liquid in my reservoir. It looks to be a good volume, so that's it. That plant is done. I'm not going to do anything with that. That reservoir's full. My moss pole has been watered, So I'll leave that. So this is my Brazil here. I can feel that the moss pole is moist right at the bottom, and I do have liquid in my reservoir. So that means that nutrient water has come through the moss and has gone to the bottom. So I'm not going to do anything with that. That one is now good to go. I've got my Syngonium here, and same thing, that pole is lovely and moist, and I have some good nutrient solution in the reservoir, not too much. So this plant is ready to go. So it's actually quite easy to water your moss poles as long as you're just keeping on top of it. That's all there is. You just need to keep on top of it. Make sure they don't get so dry that it's repelling water and you have to do more of a water than you normally would. And if they're moist, all you need to do is get your little bottle and just tip that over, or you can just stand there and pour it in, and that's it. That's your reservoir done. And if you don't have, 50 poles like I do, it wouldn't be too much of a difficult job to do. So that bottle is now done, and I am going to put another bottle up there. And with a plant like this, I mean, now that the moss at the top is moist, you could just stand there and just pour it in. I mean, I'm just literally standing here and just pouring that in. And because it's nice and moist, that all goes straight down. See, that's all going nice. So like I said, it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to take a long time, as long as you keep on top of it. So I've got the bottom of that moss pole nice and wet as well. So that's doing really, really good. I actually have a lot of liquid in this reservoir. That's too much. I'm going to take some out, because if I don't, my plant is actually going to get root rot. So that is pretty much how I water my moss poles, and I'll do that for all my plants. For the very, very big moss poles that are living in Leca, it helps sometimes. I take them outside, or I put them in a shower and I hose them down that way, and that works really, really well. So thank you very much for staying with me, and I will see you in my next video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.